Over the next hour, we're going to share some views on the outlook for the contract development and manufacturing industry. The market's been around for quite some time, since the 70s. And since its relatively modest start there in Europe and its origins, it's become truly global. It's seen many, many changes. It's expanded its services across the life cycle, from discovery through life cycle management, and across the value chain from lower value early intermediates, to high value packaged drug product. And over that time as well is developed as an integral and very strategic part of the overall way, to bring, compliant and cost-effective medicines to market as a service provider and a partner to the pharma companies. One thing that hasn't changed over that period is that the outlook for the CDMO market is first and foremost impacted by the broader pharmaceutical industry trends. We've got a relatively limited time this morning, so we've selected just a few areas that we wanted to focus on to explore in more detail. And those are just the evolving business models that we're seeing in the industry, consolidation and what that means in terms of the outlook, and then sort of the ever-changing needs when we look at product demographics, make versus buy decisions, etc. So I'm joined by a very experienced and panel here as well. So what I'd like to do first of all is have them introduce themselves, and then we'll jump in and we'll get stuck into the questions, and then of course what we do is very much like the other sessions as well, welcome questions from the floor here as well. So with that, John, may I ask you to start and introduce yourself, and then we'll move to Michael, etc.
Thanks, Mark. My name is John Fowler, and I work for Johnson Matthey, obviously. We're a public UK-traded company, and I've been with JM for about 30 years now. I spent the first 18 years of my career working on the catalyst side of the business, supplying car companies environmental catalysts that went into catalytic converters. And then I moved over to the pharma side of JM 12 years ago. So I've kind of had some experience in different industries, and the 12 years in pharma has been very exciting, to say the least. When people hear JM, they really don't think about pharmaceutical products and services offerings. They think more about precious metals and the catalyst side of the business and everything. So I thought I'd say a little bit about how JM even got into pharma. And really our roots go back to the late 70s, where we got involved in the development and manufacturing of platinum-based compounds, cisplatin, followed by carboplatin. And then we moved from there into niche APIs, mostly controlled substances. So the offerings today, the Fine Chemicals Division, which I look after, are those controlled substances. We also support our clients with a custom pharma solutions business, basically developing and manufacturing APIs, both for mostly innovator clients, but some generic clients. And then we also do catalysts. That's a big part of JM, and the catalyst business that I look after is we manufacture heterogeneous, homogeneous enzyme or biocats, and 70% of our clients in this area are pharmaceutical companies. So those are three key offerings, and finally, life cycle management, and that's supporting both innovator clients, trying to develop successors to the drugs that they have. May it be a different polymorph to improve bioavailability. On the generic side, it's helping our partners and clients develop ANDAs. So that's our business, and I'm excited to be here.
Thanks, John. Michael?
Thanks, John. So my name is Michael Quirnbach. I'm the Global Head of Marketing Sales at Corden Pharma. I've been with Corden Pharma the last 2 years, and have been in the industry for 15 years. I started as a development chemist at AMRI, and then worked for companies like Solvias, Siegfried, Dr. Reddy's. Maybe a lot of you may not know, Corden Pharma is a pretty young CDMO. It has been around now for 10 years. We have sales of around 400 million euros, but it was put together by acquisitions of pharma assets, all from big pharma, and we belong to the ICIG group, which is today 29 manufacturing sites and 2.2 billion euro sales. So we have structured our business now by technology platforms. We are active in 5 technology platforms, we call them: small molecule manufacturing, peptides, injectables, high potent onco, and antibiotics. For all of these technology platforms, we offer a fully integrated supply for drug substance, drug product, and also packaging services. Thanks.
So, good morning, everybody. My name's Ian Muir. I'm the Managing Director for Asica Pharmaceuticals. So I joined Asica 3 years ago at the point where Asica was acquired by Consort Medical, which is a UK-listed company. Consort Group has really 2 offerings. Asica, which is a full-service CDMO from API, product development, fill finish, some warehousing and distribution. And then on the Bestpac side, which is the sister company, a long heritage in drug device development for both inhalation and also parenteral use. So bringing those 2 pieces together is really part of that strategy of offering a number of different things to our clients. So prior to joining Asica, I had 10 years in various roles with one of the big 2 CDMOs. So I've been in CDMO for a long time.
Good morning, David Long from UCB, and I guess I need to say straight away that UCB does not offer CDMO services. I'm here to represent the potential clients of CDMOs. My role at UCB is I look after the design and implementation of our industrial manufacturing strategy, initially rationalizing what we manufactured internally and externally. And we're now looking at the whole supply chain from development through launch and end of life cycle. The reason I'm here is because UCB has got some interesting challenges at the moment from a CMC perspective. The first one is that we actually have a pipeline that is too big for us to manage internally. So this is new for UCB. We've always done all our development work internally, and all of a sudden we find we can't manage it. So we're looking for external partners to help us with that. And the second challenge we have is, and for those of you that were here yesterday that heard Duncan McHale talk about UCB, we are challenging the clinical development program to try and reduce the time and the amount of clinical effort we need to do to get a product registered. What that is doing for us is it's moving the CMC development program onto the critical path. So we're looking for that flexibility, agility, and speed, if you like, that we hope our partners could offer. We're looking at the CDMO concept because that will help us potentially go from one partner right the way through. We avoid the tech transfer discussion I think we had in the previous discussion in this room. So I'm here, if you like, from the other side, representing the clients of CDMOs.
Thanks, David. Thanks, gentlemen. So the first area we really wanted to explore this morning was the evolving business models that we're seeing there. As companies have looked to grow and optimize cost bases, expand into adjacent, offerings using some capabilities, the core capabilities that they have, we see less pure play CMOs out there or CDMOs. We see less pure generic companies. Actually, you see less pure pharma companies there when we look at these different kinds of offerings are out there. The generic companies that, were, originally, born out of India, of China, Southern Europe, etc., increasingly looking to expand into exclusive synthesis. And, CMOs are, almost all of them have some element of generic products in their portfolios now. CROs want to become CMOs, and CMOs want to become CROs, and there's all going to be a little bit of an identity crisis thing going on there. And just to cap it all, the pharma companies have extensive generic businesses themselves, and some of them have CMO businesses which would be up with the major ones in the world in terms of CDMOs, in terms of the size of them as well. So, there's very, very blurry lines there. We wanted to ask ourselves, is this logical strategies? Is it opportunism? because these business models that they practice, whether it's products or a pharma business model, a service business model, FTE rates, etc., they're different. So, what does that mean for the market going forward? So, with that brief introduction, maybe John, I'll start with you and maybe get some of your perspectives on, why is that happening, and what are these drivers? Why all these different stakeholders are expanding beyond their core offerings.
Yeah, Mark, I think the answer is pretty straightforward. It's companies looking for sustainable growth. If you're a CDMO and you're tied to supplying innovator clients, it can be a roller coaster, as I think most of us know around the table. You invest a lot of time, resource, effort, working with that client as they helping them shepherd their molecules through the clinic, and some get commercial approval and some don't, and so it can be a roller coaster. And if it works out well, great. But how do you deal with the ups and downs that come with that business? So I think it's a logical transition to diversify the portfolio and bring in some generics. And on the generic side, it doesn't come without risk, but it tends to be more predictable. The uncertainty really is how much market share you're going to get, how many generic competitors there's going to be. So I think it diversifies the product mix, the portfolio, takes out the lumpiness in your business, and it helps you drive for a more sustainable top line, really. And I guess the other, and it goes both ways. It could be a generic company looking to get into supporting innovators and custom stuff. And the other key element is we all want to improve the financial metrics of our businesses and maximize our return on invested capital. So capacity utilization is key. So if you have spare capacity, you have opportunities, you want to be able to fill it. So I think that's why you have a lot of us looking at both segments of the market.
Do you want to expand a little, and maybe we get from the sort of the drug substance side, and then maybe Ian, you could comment from the drug product side. What is it important, when you're looking at being successful and running mixed business models there? Things like the mindset of a CMO, which is predominantly service driven, versus, let's say, a generic company that starts as Origins, which is product driven there. They might lead to different views of how you manage the business there, what the priorities are, etc. Do you have any perspectives on that in terms of what's successful to run it from drug substance first of all?
Sure. I guess my first comment would be, running both models isn't easy, and I don't think many companies do it very well. And I think when you look at the players in the market, most are either dominated by innovators or dominate on the generic side. So it's not easy to do. And supporting innovators, it's the classic service model. So it's a service business. It's built on strong relationships with your clients, a deep level of trust, and very deep interactions. On the generic side, it's different. It's more internally focused. Speed to market is the prevailing driver that you're trying to accomplish. So it's really different skill sets. And when I think about it, from the API side, I'd be interested to see what Ian has to say on the drug product side. But if you take a process chemist that's spent the better part of their career supporting innovator clients, and then ask that same chemist to go and develop generics, they struggle. When you're working on the innovators, you're working on discrete bits and pieces of an organic synthesis with lots of support and help from the resources of your client, because they have lots of resource. And then when you ask them to do work on generics, they have to take a more holistic view. And I've heard the same issues exist on the drug product side, but so being able to use your people resource for both is a challenge. So you have that challenge, and then you've got the obvious customer service element that's completely different when you're dealing with an innovator client. So I think to summarize, to be successful, you really have to focus on what you're good at, and pick opportunities that play into your core competencies. And if you do that, you have a better shot at being successful.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Ian?
Yeah, so I think just picking up on that comment, it's difficult to operate in a mixed model at any stage, and there's always that conflict of changing priorities. So, at any given point in time, you decide that one thing or the other is the priority, but those changes. And if you're in the CDMO world, your customers struggle to suddenly be deprioritized because you've got an internal project that's suddenly the must-do thing. I think in CDMO, in general, over the last 10 years, that there's been a change. I know when I first started out, certainly the branded pharmaceutical sector was paranoid about CDMOs doing anything in the generic space. So the thought that you'd work on their molecule with anyone else or work on a generic product, it was in all the contracts, etc. Now, it never even gets raised because just there's an acceptance that most of the branded companies have generics and vice versa, so there's so much intermingling of products that people have just got used to that idea. It's very tempting, certainly on the finished dose side, for CDMOs to get into generic type products or owning products. But I do think there's a very different capability requirement, because a lot of the success in that area is really understanding the market dynamics. It's about market access. It's about picking the right targets to win, and those are skills and capabilities that traditionally CDMO does not have, and so it's difficult to win without that skill set. I think where I would draw a distinction is where you've got differentiated technology. So where you've clearly got an advantage in the space, then you can leverage that technology where there just aren't going to be a number of players, so you can sort of have more control about the outcome. But I think generics is also about a balanced portfolio risk, so you're not going to win all of them. You've got to have enough possibilities that some of them hit the target, and CDMOs tend to be sort of speculative about the way they get into product development. And my opinion is that they can't cover enough bases to win on an average basis. So I think they'll continue to be speculative where there's technology, but probably not win in the broader sense.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I'd like to sort of press that point a little bit further. Because I think what you're both saying there in terms of the expansion, leveraging your core competencies, etc., makes a great deal of sense, optimizing cost-based profitability, etc. This idea that, because I agree with you as well, Ian, that the mindset has changed for the way that generics are perceived in the way that they're developed within pharma company, CDMOs. I mean, you were persona non grata if you brought this up, 10, 15 years ago or so, whereas there's a much more nuanced view on it now. In fact, just last CPHI, I was really quite surprised that, I'm not mentioning any names, of course, but one of the pharma companies where the product was very important for them that we've worked on for many years was proactively bringing that forward, that we could market that with other products, with other companies as well, to help with volume variance and keep their costs sharp. But maybe, David, I'll ask you, where are the boundaries now? Where do you see the boundaries, sort of evolving there as well? Because you can be the supplier there, but at some point you encroach on becoming a competitor. Where do you see the boundaries these days?
Well, let me first of all pick up on Ian's point about the CDMO. I think, if I'm looking for a CDMO, then I want to have a good base business so that they are financially sound, if you like. If there's too much speculation, then if your product in phase 2 suddenly dies, then it puts the CDMO in a problem. So I think there is a need for a base business. If it's generics, I think so long as there's not what I would call a conflict of interest, and as Ian said, at one point it was always in the contract. I think these days you'd still put it in the contract. But I think as long as it's not a conflict of interest and they're not in direct competition, I don't see that being an issue.
Maybe if I move up, Michael, I'll ask you, some pharma companies have CMO business units, which are actually larger than many CDMOs, right? They're huge, they're vast, they're growing. You know, is that something you think we're going to see more of in the future? And, you know, what you can see some logic for that, but I mean, there's challenges to that as well. Do you want to give some observations on that, maybe?
Yes, thank you. I think we had early on, I mean, if companies looking for CDMOs, they're looking for somebody who's flexible, agile, fast, experienced. So I do not see that this is a business model which makes sense for big pharma to offer contract manufacturing going forward. I think will be declining. I think it's rather more these big pharma companies should think about maybe divesting their assets, so we acquired a lot of these assets also, and maybe then better work with CDMOs together, but not offering contract manufacturing. There might be only a few situations I can think about where a big pharma has, let's say, special technology which is not readily available, but overall I think it's just these companies are not flexible when it comes to manufacturing, managing multiple projects. And also there's conflict of interest, or quickly there might be other internal projects coming up having higher priority, and it will be deprioritized then, and you are the customer. And if you work with a CDMO, it's our bread and butter, and we're just serving customers, and a big pharma should not be a CDMO. I think it just doesn't make sense. So I believe this will decline.
Okay, I don't know if there's any perspectives from any big pharma company folks in the room. Anybody want to have a shot at that? Okay.
Mark, I would just add that, you know, and Mike, that, you know, the assets that big pharma have typically aren't very flexible. Exactly. So it's difficult for them to do what you need to do to be successful as a CDMO just by virtue of the asset base that they have.
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, we have also the experience. So when we acquire these assets from these big pharma, so we have to completely change the whole mindset of the people, of the organization, of the processes to be competitive. So I cannot see that the big pharma company is competitive offering contract manufacturing.
No, and I think it's hard to see it not as just a, partially a holding pattern. I mean, it's not a strategy session, but if you look at big pharma, the way to sustain that model is new innovative medicines. You know, that's the only way that you can keep that model going. And what you see is as pipelines dry up, you know, people then diversify into consumer health and veterinary and all these related areas to use. And it sort of moves down. But as soon as the next blockbuster comes along, everybody falls back in love with that old model. So, you know, doing CDMO work is never, you know, going to be the top of the priority list.
Maybe I'll change tack slightly there. David, you know, you've got these companies offering different FTE business models, product business models, etc., service ones. What issues does that cause you from the pharma side as you look towards going out there and, you know, really selecting, preferred partners there? Do you want to comment on that?
That is one of the challenges that we find, depending on where the CDMO has come from, whether it's come from the CRO side or the CMO side. They're used to running different business models. So if you're coming from CMO, it's about filling your assets with capacity. It's probably a project-based cost, and then it's a low-cost manufacturing. Whereas if you're coming from the CRO side and the development, then I guess it's FTE, it's resource costs, it's knowledge and technology costs. And depending on the company, then it needs to be negotiated, and maybe the model will change. So you'll start off with an FTE model in early development, and then you'll change that to a more CMO type manufacturing cost model as you go forward. But it does add a bit of complexity to the contract and the financial side. Okay.
All right. Thanks, chaps. We'll maybe change tack now. We'll move over the consolidation. That's one of the other, big trends that we, continue to talk about in the marketplace. It's still, of course, hugely fragmented. I mean, the pharma companies themselves and that part of the industry segment is massively fragmented, But again, we're seeing huge consolidation there. And that has implications ultimately for CDMOs. The CDMOs, it's even more fragmented, maybe less so in secondary than in primary manufacture, but again, huge level of fragmentation. Some say far too many players out there. It's been talked about for years and years. There seems to be a lot of inertia for that moving faster than we'd otherwise expect. You know, we hear about all these big benefits, one-stop shops, etc., for customers looking to more, you know, develop strategic relationships with fewer partners with more holistic offerings. You know, on the other hand, you know, compared to other industry segments that some of us have been in, like, you know, chemicals, petrochemicals, etc., you don't see the same type of economies of scale that other companies would enjoy thereby, you know, becoming very, very large. And in fact, some might even argue the contrary is true. You get very large with some of these offerings, which are quite complex to run, and multiple sites, and that can divert attention internally, and you become somewhat more inward focused in your outlook, which is, of course, you know, not very healthy at all for a service-based industry. So the fact of the matter is consolidation's taken place, and what will that mean for CDMOs? So again, John, since you're closest, I'm going to ask you first. When pharma companies are consolidating, you know, what does that... It presents presumably opportunities, it presents threats, you know, where you've got relationships there. Do you want to make some observations on that in terms of how that's going to shape CDMOs looking forward?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, that's the big obvious thing that comes to mind is opportunities and threats is what it creates. And, you know, most of these pharma companies have their own, you know, preferred supplier networks. So if the customer you have acquires somebody that you're not supplying, it's obviously a nice opportunity. But the opposite can happen. So, and luck is not a good strategy. So you have to think about, if you want to be successful in the long term, you got to think about, you have to make sure that you touch on all the customers, and the ones that you don't supply, you have to ask yourself, well, why am I not winning business? Do I have the right cost base? Do I have the right technical capabilities? And try to fix it, because inevitably, you know, if you put all your eggs in one basket, one supply basket, if you will, you're just relying on luck, and that's not a sustainable strategy. So I guess the other point would be, particularly with, you know, if you look at the generic side of the business, you know, the Big Teb acquisition, and, you know, I mean, there's a big acquisition every year basically, but a lot of what, you know, drives those acquisitions is and funds them is the cost synergy. So it just puts enormous pressure on those generic companies to take cost out of their supply chain. So internally they'll consolidate plants and do stuff like that, but they'll also look at the suppliers. So I think, you know, given the fact that there's, you know, only a couple large players in the CDMO space, and as you say, it's largely, you know, it's largely fragmented. I think, you know, to get the right cost base, it's going to drive consolidation in our industry. So those would be my thoughts on that.
Okay, thanks, John. Michael, is bigger better? Is there an optimal size for a CDMO to get too big?
I think we all who sit in here and who are on the CDMO side always keep discussing this. So what is the right size, and how much more should we be growing? And you can read a lot of companies would say the right size is maybe sales of 500 million, 600 million, maybe it's 1 billion. But maybe something around there. So to answer the question, is bigger better? I think it depends. So it's important that you complete your service offering. What we're offering makes sense to the customer. So it doesn't make sense to be completely very broadly offering everywhere something which maybe does not really create any values and for the customer. So for example, we focus on these platforms, and we have identified gaps, and where we think we have to close these gaps to really become a real partner then to the pharma companies. And if we keep growing, it's good, but it's important to have, I would say, a decent size. Otherwise, you cannot later afford investments, keep up with all the quality requirements, regulatory changes. I think for small companies, it's a big challenge actually, and to be a real partner for major pharma companies, from our experience.
Okay. David, any perspectives from the customer side there?
I think from our point of view, consolidation could be positive if it means that you are able to provide a broader spectrum of services. So if I, for example, DS and DP, or maybe specific types of formulations. I think from that point of view, we then move into the one-stop shop, and I think there would be advantages if you have critical mass to be able to provide that. I think the other challenge is, of course, is that CDMO is particularly around developing a partnership. We talked about collaboration earlier this morning. It needs to be a good partnership, and if you end up with a merger and your preferred partner is swallowed up by somebody else, then that may impact the relationship. But to me, the better the services, the broader the service that the company can offer, the better then they can provide.
Ian, M&As in the contract manufacturing space. How well do you think that's done? I mean, is it clear strategies we see out there? Is it a bit of opportunism? Can you share some views and some of your observations?
Yeah, so
don't have to name names, of course. You can if you want.
No, I won't use names but I think it probably picks up on the theme from the previous question. That I think scale is important, but I think it's not just about sheer size. So I think there's certainly been some examples of CDMOs just growing to be big because being big was seen as a strategy, and I think that's been shown or is being shown to not be the case. I think one of the problems there is that with this industry, and it was in the previous session it was talked about, but it's very hard to get the cost synergies out because consolidation is incredibly difficult. One, because you don't control the products in your facilities, even though you might own the building. And the regulatory hurdles to move those around and consolidate them, which is the obvious thing to do, are just very difficult. So there's the time element, but there's also the cost element, and there's the risk element. So to some extent, you can end up with capacity that you can't control fully. So that becomes a constraint. So I think the industry is looking for fewer providers. So scale is going to be important, but I think differentiation is going to be the other key piece, because I think one of the earlier presenters talked about the fact that pharma is not going to keep having everything in-house. I mean, years ago, everybody would have had a group that could develop parenteral products or do lyophilization or whatever it might be. But increasingly, that's not the case. So you're going to go to somebody who can provide that skill set and who has experience by working with multiple providers. So I think it's about scale, but also about differentiation. And so when you come to M&A, I think that's where the value creation is going to be, rather than just sheer size. I think there's a few other elements that I think probably aren't being fully exploited. We talk about this east-west dynamic, but I mean, as of today, there's very little overlap, with a few exceptions, between providers in Asia, and I'd include Japan in that, with US and Europe. So that's certainly one thing that doesn't seem to have moved forward. So it'd be interesting to see what happens there. And then the other one is this drive towards localization. So pharma companies are looking to get into all of these smaller markets. There's a lot of localization going on, whether it be Brazil or Russia or Middle East, etc. Nobody wants to put facilities into those areas because they just don't have a big enough portfolio. So again, I think there's opportunities there to enter some of those markets. So I think broadly that's where the value will be created.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Ian. There's a question that we got from a chap called Nilesh Baglet. He's asking, what tech platforms do you see as attractive in generics for the next 5 to 7 years? Anybody want to take a swing at that? So I guess we might want to think about, biosimilars, etc., are going to be playing a more significant role there moving forward. Might be interesting the generic model people are practicing there moving forward. Again, I haven't looked as recently at the demographic of the products that are coming off patent in the next 5 or 7 years, since the value of generics is often sucked out pretty fast from those things. But anybody got any comments on technology platforms that are going to support that area.
Maybe I'll take it a bit broader than generics and say I think there will be speciality platforms in the future that maybe these CDMO companies can really get into. If I look, for example, at where the FDA are going promoting continuous manufacturing, you know, this is a new technology that's coming in, which I guess, given the support the FDA are giving it, will become routine, where significant investment is needed. And I think, as mentioned earlier, you know, pharma doesn't necessarily have the portfolio to do that investment. So there's perhaps an opportunity there for the CDMOs to look at this as a possibility. So that's one area where I see that there is real opportunity.
I would just say, Mark, on the small molecule side for generics, you know, a lot of the easy stuff has been genericized already, and so what you, in terms of the future, you know, what kind of capabilities you need to have, it's going to be, you know, potent handling, you know, new compounds coming out, they're more potent. They have, you know, worse dissolution profiles. They're higher molecular weights, more complex molecules. So, you know, having capabilities that can help your clients overcome, you know, bioavailability hurdles, deal with potent handling, things like that, micronization, manipulation of the API, for example. Those things are going to, you know, be important, I think, you know, for generics, you know, moving forward.
I think that's probably true. And in fact, I think we've seen, you know, patent cliffs, of course, with more traditional products. And when you look at the demographic of, for example, high potent molecules, you know, there's probably only 20% of them that have gone generic so far. So there's probably some mini patent cliff that's coming on those sorts of things in the future as well, perhaps. But okay, thanks. In terms of winning value propositions for consolidation, you know, what works? Maybe Michael, I'll start with you on this one. You know, what works there? I mean, you've got folks that want to expand across the value chain, you know, from intermediates through to drug product. You know, you've got folks that want to go across a life cycle from discovery to, you know, soups to nuts to, you know, the life cycle management, next generation routes, etc. What do you think is the most successful formula there, and why isn't it happening faster?
Yeah, I think the industry moves slowly. But I think what we have been seeing now, what really picks up is the one-stop shop. So really companies coming to us, ordering drug substance, drug product, packaging services. And this is for biotechs, mid-sized pharma, sometimes a bit less for big pharma. But I think this is something what we have been really seeing a big demand, and up to the CDMO now to also to manage this across having integrated project management, coming across really one phase to the customer. But I think there's really where we can deliver value to our customers. There are also areas which are highly specialized where we see now this integrated service offering taking off when it comes to antibody drug conjugates. So there are only a few companies who can really make the linker, payload, conjugation, and all the way to the drug product. And I think that's also for big pharma. Some of them have a few ADCs maybe in the pipeline. It doesn't make sense to invest or have your own facilities, and you rather than turn to specialists who actually can handle this high potent material on the API side and all the way to drug product. And I think this is something where we really see this picks up. Similar also we see when it comes to peptides, early on peptide vaccines, these were really small dose, only a few grams, making it under GMP, a few hundred vials. I think this is also where the integrated service model really makes sense and provides value to the pharma companies. I think that's probably from the way we see it today. Thanks. I think maybe to answer the question why it's not picking up faster, I guess the pressure hasn't been big enough with pharma to more quickly take or embrace this model and trusting a CDMO that he can really deliver the full value. And obviously also what we see in big pharma very often is that it's very fragmented, the sourcing decision. So you have some people making drug substance decision, drug product, the next one does packaging, and very often big pharma, they just don't work together. Also, if we go there and tell them the model, there are only a few companies who really now really see the value and embrace that. For mid-size and smaller companies, it's much easier. You just have one or two decision makers, and they can quickly see the benefit. Yeah? But obviously, there's also a risk if you put all eggs in one basket with one CDMO who does in the full supply chain. Yeah? But just maybe to answer this question, I think the big pharma also has to probably think about how they're going to work better internally, how they align and also maybe streamline the process. I think that's a big weakness we see.
So maybe David, do you have any views on that? You know, if you look, do you see a change in the way that we see, because you see examples where things, for example, across the value chain, you know, you've got a partner that might manage everything from the intermediates, the API and the drug product, but it's the exception rather than the rule in general in the market. Do you see that changing in the future?
I think it might change, and one of the examples that we have is that, you know, we're seeing the amount of drug getting smaller as we go more towards personalized medicines, as we go more towards orphan drug use, where, you know, the volumes you're talking about are quite small, and there you're probably looking at niche companies that are able to do the whole value chain right the way through, and I think that is something that we are seeing beginning to happen now with these smaller volumes.
All right, well, maybe that's a nice segue into, you know, the final segment that we're going to look at, and sort of these ever-changing needs. So, because the nature of the products are continuously evolving in the market there, of course. I mean, most obviously we see the, you know, this large shift in sort of large molecules there, where over the last 3 years we've seen many more of them successfully launch with FDA launches. But, you know, it's also still very clear that, you know, small molecules, if you look at every phase through clinical development, including preclinical development, the majority of molecules are small molecules. Right? So, I mean, if you want to predict the future, you look in that pipeline, and that gives you one of the best insights in terms of the future and the future needs. So, but those small molecules, the demographic of them is changing as well, as you say, and required in smaller volumes, things like orphan drugs, you know, where, you know, I think Evaluate Pharma was suggesting that by 2020, you're going to have 20% of the, you know, the prescribed drugs going to be orphan drugs. So, you know, that puts different types of challenges to a CMO industry as well in terms of agility, speed, etc. There's also, you know, some recent reports that suggest that big pharma is spending something like, in biotech, or spending something like 10 times the amount in terms of capital investment versus CMOs. And, you know, Pharma Cos are suggesting that that's going to be one of the biggest impediments to CMO growth going forward. So why don't I start again? John, sorry, you always get the first whack at these things here. You're probably too close to me here. But why are these, what's the major changes taking place in product demographics in the future? And, you know, we've got significant invested capital base there as well, you know, for products that were developed, you know, for maybe a different type of profile, and what sort of challenges does that present us as an industry?
Well, I'll comment on the thing you said before in terms of the massive investment that's taking place in large pharma to manufacture their own stuff. And I think that's it's pretty specific to large molecules, you know, not on the small molecule side, and even on the large molecule side. We don't do that at JM, but I don't see, you know, big pharma going back to the days where they go back to manufacturing all their stuff. So I'm not too worried about that. In terms of you know, the assets that we have, and you know, the drug, the new drugs being introduced, old blockbusters, things like that. I mean, I think a lot of these drugs are going to be around for a long time. So I'm not worried about you know, the capacity investments that we have at all. And if anything, when you look at, you know, some of these new molecules coming out, they're very complex, they're potent, high molecular weight. So, you know, the manufacturing that takes place, the chemistry that takes place, it's not 2 or 3 synthetic steps, it's 5 or 10 synthetic steps. So in terms of having that investment in capacity, I think it's going to be very important. And the chemistry that's actually run is more dilute which will require a need for that capacity. So I think I don't worry too much about that. I worry more, do I have enough capacity to meet the challenges in the future? And when you look at the evolving products that are coming out, given the complexity, I think if we want to bring value to our customers, we have to invest in capabilities that help solve the problems. Potent handling, being able to do different things with the crystalline structure, polymorphs, co-crystals, things like that. All that stuff's going to play into helping our customers bring their drugs to market.
Okay, thanks. Michael, do you have any?
No, I agree with John. And we're also not too worried about. I think it's really specific where big pharma is investing today, and I think we don't fear that it's going to be a problem for us.
Yeah, I guess I agree as well. I think the investment is in bio. It's also in some of the emerging markets that Ian mentioned, but I think particularly China, where we're seeing a lot of investment in the bio area at the moment due to the changing Chinese regulations. I also agree with John that the chemistry is getting more complex and we're going to need more capabilities within the API area going forward.
Ian, on the drug product, anything you see there? Any perspectives in terms of the changing demographics that's different? Or?
No, I mean, I think I'd sort of agree with the rest of the panel. The two big drivers, products are getting smaller. There's still the big volume products out there, but generally the newer products are more focused on areas. I think we talk a lot about globalization, but actually one of the challenges I think the industry is facing actually is the reality is a lot of unwinding of that globalization, where countries are starting to do their own thing. So we're seeing that in terms of regulatory approvals, we're seeing it in terms of localization of manufacturing, and then you take another example with serialization, where everybody's heading towards serialization, but everyone's adopted a different platform, a different way of doing it, etc. So if anything, that complexity at a smaller SKU level is increasing. So I think that's causing industry on the branded side to look again at their capacity, because clearly it's configured for those larger products. And so we're seeing, I think, a split, companies that are moving much more to outsourcing and others that are saying, well, actually, we're going to invest in providing that in-house capacity. And I think that review's going on at the moment. It sort of seems to become the trend again. I don't know whether there's consultants out there doing this, but everybody seems to be looking at their network right now. So I think we're going through another of those waves of industry realignment. I think the other piece that I think is increasingly coming through, certainly on the finished product side, is the whole logistics and supply chain. So everybody's challenged with managing their working capital so that they can take that money and put it back into R&D, which is getting more expensive. So everyone's become focused on minimizing the amount of inventory, slimming out the supply chain from finished product to the market. And as you look at these more complex supply chain routes, pharma's not well placed to do that. And I think you will see more new entrants from the DHLs and the UPSs and people who do that for a living as a way of taking that cost out of the supply chain. So.
Okay, thanks. Sort of linked to that, you mentioned the scale there, Ian. There's a question again, Nilesh is back. He's got a question in terms of how attractive is small-scale manufacturing in the CDMO space? Who wants to have a shot? Michael's looking like he's going to...
It all depends. I mean, it is attractive. We have a number of products actually which we do on small scale, which is only a couple of kilos. But it's very high value material. It's around 40 steps, so it is attractive. We also do a lot of often drugs now. We have adjusted our assets so we can accommodate these requests, and so for us it is attractive. The challenge is, of course, when you have these small batch sizes and really keeping your plant busy and having enough products, and that's going to be the challenge, and the huge constant turnover of products, a constant cleaning. So basically we're going to do more cleaning at the end than maybe manufacturing, and this of course adds a lot of to the overall cost of the product, then that's a challenge. But otherwise, for us, we thought it's attractive, and we have adopted to that model already. Yeah.
David touched on continuous manufacturing in an answer earlier. So we've got experience of that, and certainly that plays to the smaller batch size. And I think intuitively people say, well, continuous manufacturing, it's about turning the machine on and it run high volume products. But actually, it's almost the complete opposite. Where it actually comes into its own is small batches of very high value API, because you're minimizing the amount of changeover, you're minimizing the transfer between unit operations, and the amount of material that you lose is minimized. But also during development, you can change the parameters as you're running the process because it's not batch based. So in the era where the amount of available material in development is becoming smaller and smaller and more costly, you want to conserve that. So actually, I think technology will start to address some of those challenges of not only the cost of the material, but just the sheer availability of the material. So.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Michael. Nilesh, did that answer your question? I don't know where you are. It did? Okay, thank you. All right. Any other questions from the floor? No?
Hi. Is it working? Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Sean Robinson, I work at Lonza, one of the big CDMOs. I think big is definitely better, and for the reasons David gave, but also there's something that hasn't been mentioned, which is that for Lonza, at least 50% of our client base are small enterprises, startups in San Francisco, small companies with VC funding. So they're not the big, giant pharma companies looking to work with us. A lot of those customers have the manufacturing and development needs in-house. So what Lonza and other top-tier CDMOs are doing is offering the smaller companies the opportunity to have the same experience in terms of technology and broad expertise that you would get in a large pharma, which you might not get that experience in a smaller organization. That was just the point I wanted to make, but a question I had was around, I was hoping maybe we'd talk more about business models today, and risk sharing in particular. And there are different aspects to risk sharing. So some of those might be guaranteeing a minimal amount of product or in a particular time frame, or getting paid more if you make more than the customer wanted, or presumably the customer wanted it, but more than they contracted. Or indeed, in some cases, and Lonza isn't doing this, but we see some of our competitors maybe going into this space, is actually investing in some of the outcomes of the products that you manufacture, rather than simply a fee-for-service model. And I'm wondering whether that investment opportunity, especially in small organizations, you take a while to generate the funds. It could be a year before they come to Lonza and actually get a quote to starting working with us. Is there an opportunity in the sector for CDMOs to provide those small enterprises to get the phase one, at least the phase one clinical data sooner?
A great question. So does anybody want to take a shot at that?
I mean, I'll take a stab at the last one. I won't try and address the business model in the time we've got available. Certainly, one of the, I think on the traditional CDMO side, co-investment or risk sharing is probably not, it's very early stages. I mean, certainly one of the things that I've come to understand is that on the drug device side, that model is more prevalent, and as a company, we made a number of investments where the people developing the concept device are often very small companies looking to move it through clinical development, and so there's an opportunity there to co-invest to get it to that phase one, phase two proof of concept. So that model is much more prevalent in that sector. So I think there's certainly scope to develop that.
I think also for us, risk sharing as a CDMO in early stage phase one is not something which we actually considering. And it's for us, the reason also is it's very difficult for us to really evaluate which ones we should be betting on. So that makes it extremely difficult for a CDMO to select, and it also takes a long time before we get any return. And margins are very slim in the CDMO business, so we have not very much money to play around, and we rather invest this in assets and improve our processes and other things than betting on these things. Where we have done it actually is a bit different, where we had a partnership with a generic company and where we can actually assess the market situation for certain sterile oncology products where we're quite strong. And there it makes sense, but this is probably a little bit of a different model then. So we just maybe offer tech transfer at a reduced price and later get paid back when they go into the market. But there we can see the horizon, and it just takes maybe 2 or 3 years, and that's easy to assess. But for early stage biotechs, we would not do it.
Okay, it'll probably take us a little off track. Oh, John,
yeah, I was
you
just
want
to agree with Michael. I think risk sharing on the generic side is alive and well, and has been for quite a while, for all the reasons that you say. On the innovator side, I mean, I don't agree. We're not really capable of evaluating, the success factors, the clinical studies, the things like that to make those bets. However, I mean, you can be opportunistic and pick and choose, and there might be opportunities where you've got, an existing, compound that's not an NCE, that's just being, life cycle managed into a prodrug or, different dosage form. There, I think you can, easier to make those kind of, difficult risk decisions.
Yeah, I think what you here and there, the pattern where, risk sharing, I mean, it depends on the share, it depends on the definition of it. You have to manage risk, not just take risk in those sorts of things, and it has to make sense for both parties. I'd be happy, we've run out of time, but I'd be happy to have a chat about where I've seen some examples, maybe over a coffee break, at both ends of the market in terms of just a very late phase, as well as on the CRO side as well. So I've seen some examples where it's been practiced. But we've come to the end of the session today. So first of all, I thank you as an audience. I'd like to thank the panel. They've done a great job. So if you could join me in thanking them.